Hello, everyone. My name is Ninaa Persad, and I'm the VP of Customer Operations at InfoSec Global. In this exclusive interview, we sit down with Vladimir Soukharev, the VP of Cryptographic R&D at InfoSec Global. Vladimir is a renowned expert in the field of cryptography, and in this conversation, we delve into the critical topic of transitioning to post-quantum cryptography and the pivotal role of crypto agility plays in safeguarding our digital future. So, hi, Vladimir. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, my pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, one of my first questions is, can you explain what post-quantum cryptography is and why it is essential for our digital security?
Of course, but I'll start a little bit further back in history or in preliminaries for that. So when we talk about something that is called quantum, there's really three disciplines we're referring to, which are quite different, I would say almost independent of each other. There's a notion of quantum computing. This is actually building a quantum computer that's going to be capable of solving a lot of good problems that are hard to solve in a classical computer today, but at the same time is going to be able to solve some of the hard mathematical problems on which our current public key cryptography heavily relies on, namely factorization of large integers, as well as finding discrete logarithms, regardless which group we're in. Second thing is quantum cryptography, which is referring to actually signaling between 2 points so that they can actually establish a key among them. But this is purely hardware solution, has a very different type of applications, and usually would not be applicable to be used in large scale. And thirdly, the post-quantum cryptography, what that is about, it's actually a way to find cryptographic algorithms which can run on today's computers. So they can run completely classically, but the underlying hard mathematical problems are going to be immune to the attacks by a quantum computer. So post-quantum cryptography is basically cryptography that can be used today, can be used tomorrow, can be used later, but it's going to be secure against quantum threat.
So thanks so much for that, Vladimir. What are the primary threats that quantum computing poses to current cryptographic systems?
The threat is actually quite devastating. It's more devastating than it might seem. Although I mentioned that quantum computing is going to break all of the public key cryptography, in reality, this really means that it's going to break almost all of cryptography, because if you're using public key cryptography, and the main uses of public key cryptography are to do a key establishment as well as to do digital signatures. However, in practice, after you establish the key, you start using the symmetric cryptography. So if the key was established by public key methods, it's technically already leaked if you have a quantum computer that is large enough to actually break it, or as today they're called cryptographically relevant quantum computer. So that way, this means that probably 95% of our cryptography is going to be broken, because if it's again public key, it's broken. If it's symmetric key, however, the key was originally generated by public key methods, that's broken as well. So this means that pretty much everything that we use today is going to get broken. So that's why the effect is quite devastating.
Thank you for that. One of the things that I find when I'm speaking to both customers and potential customers, there is some confusion around PQC and quantum cryptography. Can you please explain the difference between the two?
As I explained in my first answer to the first question, the main ideas of the difference between the three notions of quantum. But now let's focus a little bit more on quantum cryptography versus post-quantum cryptography. Quantum cryptography relies heavily on hardware. So this is basically hardware solutions. There's quantum signaling happening between two parties if we're talking about quantum key distribution aspect. And what happens is that those two parties have to have those physical devices that are able to communicate using quantum principles and establish a key. And the security relies on the fact that if somebody tampers, means listens into their channel, that will be known. And so therefore that key will not be used. That's the major aspect of security there. So there's technically no mathematical aspect to this. It's just the hardware and physical properties of quantum communications. The other part of quantum cryptography is QRNG, so quantum random number bit generator. So today we're using PRNGs, pseudo random number generators, But this is just basically a replacement. And technically, it's just another way to obtain randomness, which of course is also important. Although we do have, like today, I would say today's approach to random number generators, they're actually very high quality. Therefore, this notion is fixed and it's not really affected by quantum computing in a sense. Post-quantum cryptography, again, as I mentioned, is public key cryptography, or falls into the category of public key cryptography. And it basically changes the underlying hard mathematical problems from today's used mathematical problems. For example, RSA is based on factoring. Elliptic curve diffie-Hellman is based on finding discrete logarithms in the elliptic curve group. All of these ones are vulnerable to quantum computing. Therefore, those problems need to be changed. So the fundamental underlying hard mathematical problems are replaced, but it's all still done classically. So you don't need a quantum computer or anything outside of what we have today to actually be able to use it. So therefore, and you, based on those hard mathematical problems, the algorithms for, again, key establishment for digital signatures are built. And that way, because those underlying hard mathematical problems are hard both for classical and quantum computer, they become safe. And this notion is called post-quantum cryptography. So again, cryptography that can be used today, could have been used yesterday, and can be used tomorrow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those definitions. I found them really helpful. I'd love to just pivot a little bit into the role of crypto agility. And so there certainly has been an increase in demand in organizations wanting to create a more crypto agile approach within their environment. Can you just tell me a little bit, like, how does crypto agility help organizations prepare for the transition to post-quantum cryptography?
So transition to post-quantum cryptography it's actually a very difficult notion of its own. And as you might have heard, there's an ANSI COE initiative that has started a project that is specifically focused on the migration aspect. So this is working on standardizing the new set of algorithms. But the migration, because it's so complicated, there is actually a separate track for this. But talking about crypto agility, this is a must-have. But let's take one step back. Before starting with cryptographic agility, you need to understand what you need to migrate. And in order to understand what you need to migrate, you need to actually be able to get the entire inventory of your crypto. And among that, figure out what is quantum vulnerable, what is not quantum vulnerable, where is it located, how is it used, etc. So you really need to have the full visibility of it. Realistically, you're also going to see a lot of vulnerabilities that are current ones as well. Even if we forget about the quantum computer at the current moment. But the fact is, everything that is vulnerable today is going to be quantum vulnerable tomorrow, as well as a number of other things are going to be quantum vulnerable tomorrow. So that's why visibility is the first step. And then comes the crypto agility. Crypto agility actually becomes quite essential because, one thing is migration. And yes, migration is a very difficult task to accomplish in cryptography. And historically, we are yet to go through the biggest cryptographic migration we've ever seen in history. So we don't even have an idea of how complicated that is. We understand it's going to be complicated, but the real life will show. Because one thing is looking at it from as a cryptographer point of view, which is complicated enough. Now, when it goes down to the engineering teams, to developers, this becomes even a bigger chaos. So realistically, we're yet to see the effect of this, but it's going to be enormous and something that we've never experienced in history yet. And so crypto agility, one thing you need it for is to actually smooth your migration, right? Because you really need to do this big replacement and you need to make it as smooth as possible and prevent the downtimes and make sure that you're able to catch a lot of majority of things that you need to migrate, etc. Second thing is actually, it's not going to be a one-step migration. If you notice, NIST has already standardized 2 algorithms from before. Now there are FIPS documents that are going to be finalized by beginning of 2024 for another 3 algorithms. But this is not over yet. So we have post-quantum algorithms that are already standardized, which we should start using as soon as possible. But at the same time, there's actually more candidates in round 4. That means NIST will standardize more algorithms. NIST has started a parallel track, so there's going to be more algorithms. So our PQC migration is not going to be a one-step migration. So imagine if we get through that step somehow without go into crypto agility, well, we'll have to do the step multiple times, which becomes, we have a very complicated task, which now becomes multiple times more complicated. And thirdly, there is no guarantee that things are not going to change along the way as well. And finally, this is just talking about the migration side. Now let's talk about, the usability side. There's not a common solution that, one fits all in terms of the new set of algorithms that, there's multiple algorithms to use, and depends on your use case, you're going to be using different algorithms. So how would you be able to quickly adapt to which algorithm needs to be used in which case, if sometimes you might need to switch, the algorithms once every second or once every millisecond or once every minute, doesn't really matter, but there's going to be that management of what algorithms gets used in which specific use case, depending on whom you're talking to or what's the applicability of your communication, the current moment, etc. So then using post-quantum cryptography would really need agility to make it, I would say, more usable or more friendly usable in that sense.
Thank you, Vladimir. Could you provide some examples of cryptographic lifecycle management strategies and their benefits?
Of course. So there's multiple strategies, but in general, number one step that you need to start off with is cryptographic discovery. This is exactly what our AgileSec analytics tool does, is that it discovers cryptography. And there's not just quantum vulnerabilities, there's actually also a lot of classical vulnerabilities. And as you know, everything that is classically insecure is automatically quantumly insecure. So therefore, your quantum vulnerabilities are going to be everything that is vulnerable today plus the quantum vulnerable aspects to it. And the thing is, the infrastructure in general is very complicated. It's very much unmanaged, or there's a lot of, they might think that they manage it, but in general, there's still quite a lot of components that are unmanaged or left aside because there's generations of developers going through the ecosystem. And they have their own approaches, and if they're not cryptographic experts, there is a good chance that they might have made a mistake, or maybe it just got outdated. There's third-party applications that are coming into the infrastructure. Those ones you technically have no control over. You don't have the source code to it, and that's why our tool actually also looks down to the binary. So you don't need to have the source code. If it's third-party applications and you have the binary, and there's cryptography in it, then you need to understand what that cryptography is. You need to have the visibility into that. And that's quite essential because you really don't want to just have control of your in-house made applications. You want to have control of everything that is inside your environment. And therefore, number one step is to be basically able to have the inventory of all the cryptography inside your infrastructure, regardless if it belongs to you or it doesn't belong to you, or like, again, as an example, you've purchased it from a third party. And then, of course, the next step is going to be the cryptographic agility. That's when you start working on cryptographic agility. That's when you start replacing your conventional cryptography with crypto-agile methodologies, into which you can plug in any cryptography, including quantum-resistant cryptography, of course. And that's usually, that's the major driver behind it, of course. But again, you have the freedom once you're crypto agile, what cryptography you're plugging in. And then again, you have to prioritize your infrastructure as well, right? So again, you would have to work on a perimeter first, as I call it. That means any data that leaves your premises, that's the infrastructure that you need to care the most about, that gate of where your data leaves your premises, because when it's external, it's completely open. When it's internal, maybe there's more control that you have over the data flow. I mean, we're not saying it's absolutely secure, but then there's less chances that somebody will be able to look into that data versus something that just leaves your premises or maybe travels between headquarters and data center or cloud or whatever the use case is. So, and then, once you prioritize your environment, start changing it step by step.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Vladimir. I think, the discovery piece being the first step of the process is something that a lot of organizations are coming around to. I'm curious a little bit about what you see or what you've heard in terms of the main challenges organizations are facing when they're trying to adopt a post-quantum cryptography strategy.
There's a few things, but two major ones, and they are actually related to the step number one I've talked about. A lot of them have a lack of understanding what this is all about, actually. They understand there's a quantum threat, but they're very most common challenge I hear about is that they have no idea where to start, what needs to be done, and what is this threat all about. They might understand it in general terms, but when you actually start talking deeply about it, they don't have the base or the knowledge they need to actually be able to start doing something about it. So the biggest challenge is knowledge and also the visibility. I would say, again, those two come hand in hand, is visibility or cryptography, and knowing why is there a quantum threat, and what really needs to be done about it. And then the next is, basically figuring out the roadmap that is needed for the organization.
Absolutely. I'm curious a little bit, how do organizations strike that balance between the need for security with the practicality of implementing the new cryptographic standards?
So again, they have different risk assessments. For example, there's some risk assessments that are developed, for instance, for financial sector, and they, you can start prioritizing, thinking, in these environments, data is that valuable. Therefore, there's going to be some percentage increasing, the need to actually replace that, etc. So it really depends on the value of their communication links or the data that is encrypted, and then looking at the value. How much do they lose if they don't do this in time versus how much do they actually save if they do it in time, or how devastating, the break would be. Of course, one thing that always comes, into this equation is that nobody really knows when the large enough quantum computer is going to be available, or cryptographically relevant quantum computer, because quantum computers are here already. The question is, when are they going to be of the scale that is going to be devastating? I mean, in the past couple of weeks, there's been a few claims saying that RSA or ACC is already broken. These are just claims. I'm not saying that the quantum computer that is going to break them is here. But to think about it, we haven't had these kind of claims ever really before in happening like this. But the fact that they're happening right now, I think this is actually telling us that there's organizations racing to build this large enough quantum computer. And so therefore, some of them are trying to make maybe a head start in terms of their claims and then maybe catch up to it. But this means that it might be here sooner than we might anticipate, because the general understanding is that it should be here within X amount of years. X meaning maybe 3, maybe 5, maybe 7, maybe 10, maybe 15. Nobody really knows. And this is what brings a lot more to our equation of this uncertainty. And one of the US documents, the CNSA 2.0 document, is actually telling that the first few due dates for migration to PQC for some of the aspects of the infrastructure there are in 2030, which is actually, we're 7 years, or actually now even less than 7 years away from that due date. And we know that cryptographic migrations take anywhere from 5 to 15 years to do. So therefore, if they haven't started, they might be late already.
Well, thank you so much for that answer, Vladimir. Another question that I have is, what sort of advice would you give organizations looking to prioritize post-quantum cryptography and crypto agility?
So, well, the first advice I would give them is, start acting now, basically. Start implementing the plan, building the groups. I see that some organizations are building those groups right now, but really start taking actionable items. And major thing is I think the understanding is actually there already for a lot of organizations, large organizations at least. I can see that they're aware of the quantum threat, but they really need to start acting and getting as many of their team members aware of it as much as possible, because there's different types of awarenesses. Of course, somebody coming from the executive level needs to have awareness, but to a certain extent, they don't need to be, overwhelmed with quantum gates and how, all this math behind, lattice-based crypto or whatever cryptography aspects we're taking works. But they need to understand, and they need to understand how important it is, versus somebody who is a cryptographer or a dedicated security specialist who is at least supposed to try to, figure out something to do with cryptography. Maybe he doesn't know the algorithms deep, but he needs to understand the threat and what gets affected by it. So the understanding of it needs to be here as soon as possible. And I would say probably best if it was there past maybe 3 years ago, and then start taking actionable items. And they need to understand that this is not an easy journey. This is something they need to start, it's going to take them quite a lot of effort and time, and therefore they need to act fast because there's not that much time left.
Thank you so much, Vladimir. Do you have any success stories or best practices from organizations that have successfully implemented some of these strategies?
Yes, there are some organizations that I can see that they're actually working towards the discovery stream. And interestingly enough, organizations that started worrying about even today's threats, they're actually a bit ahead because, for example, our agile sec analytics tool is capable of discovering your cryptographic artifacts, but it's looking for today's vulnerabilities, and it will be able to not just find quantum vulnerabilities, but tell you, roughly how far away they are in terms of, there's different algorithms that need different number of logical qubits, etc. We can actually, tell you that, you have these algorithms, they're quantum vulnerable, but this one's going to get broken before that one's going to get broken. So therefore, you can actually prioritize things in that way as well. So organizations that have basically started looking at cryptography, the whole crypto management aspect, the life cycle, the discovery, they're actually a step ahead because they already have the tools running to start it. So it takes them, one extra, let's say, click to actually start analyzing what is quantum vulnerable versus what they were looking at, classical vulnerabilities. And I would say this is a great success story because for a lot of organizations, we know that there's a whole cycle in terms of figuring out that they need it, then finding where to get it, and then actually implementing the solution. So again, I would say it's a huge success story. Whoever started early are actually going to be the most, I think, successful in that regard.
Wonderful. Yeah, those folks are well ahead of the game. So what do you envision as the future of cryptography beyond the post-quantum era?
Well, right now it's hard to say it from a mathematical point of view, but one thing I'm always thinking about is that today we're talking about the quantum threat, and there's a certain set of algorithms that we are aware about that are going to be able to break, again, today's cryptography. But this is what we can think about while not even having our hands on cryptographically relevant quantum computer. And interesting is that once it's going to be available there, I'm sure it's going to be capable of more than what we can, think of it theoretically. So therefore, there's really more preparations needed, and therefore we really need crypto agility. Even today's standards or today's things that are being standardized, they might need tweaks, they might need changes, because right now we're just saying theoretically this is broken. Well, theoretically this is broken means that there's like 98% chance that once we have a practical quantum computer is going to get broken, but there's other capabilities we might be able to discover. And another thing is, you don't need your own quantum computer. That's another thing to keep in mind, is because, for example, look at IBM's model. You can access their quantum computer via, just remotely. And quantum computers are not there to replace, our today's computers. They're there to help do some computation processors. For example, the most devastating algorithm is known as the Shor's algorithm. It requires classical pre-computation. Then there's this hard component that a quantum computer would be able to do efficiently. And then there's classical post-computation. So you would be doing some pre-computations on your laptop. You're going to be sending it off, the next steps to, remote access to some quantum computer that you just paid your subscription for, or whatever the scenario would be. And then you get your results back, finish it off with, your classical post-computations, and that's it. It's broken. So therefore, there's going to be no need for every household to actually have a quantum computer for it to be, a reality. It only takes one quantum computer to bring the threat. I'm not trying to say quantum computers are bad. There's actually going to be a lot of great things they're going to be able to do. That's one of the major, reasons why they're built. They're going to help with machine learning algorithms, etc. There's going to be a lot of beneficial aspects to the quantum computer. So therefore, it's not built just purposely for, to break cryptography. Breaking cryptography, I would say it's a byproduct, an unfortunate one. Or maybe it's fortunate, maybe it's time for us to change cryptography that we've been using for, past 20 years. So who knows in that case. But again, that's why quantum computers are going to be built, they're going to be scaled, because again, there's tons of benefits coming to them. But again, as I said, one thing that the other side of it is that it does break today's cryptography.
Well, that's a great segue into my next question. I'm curious a little bit about, what you're seeing in terms of emerging technologies or trends that could reshape the cryptographic landscape.
So there's a lot. Like, I mean, in terms of technologies in general, right? We're seeing this reshaping, like, happening big time. For example, was all the IoT, was the cars connected. Like, imagine if you take a car that has been produced today versus the car that's been produced 30 years ago. Like, 30 years, like, there's probably, there's some basic electronics in it, but there would be, all these secure communications. Now you need to make sure your car is able to communicate securely. Now, if it's autonomous, there must be, that's quite critical component. So that really needs to be protected.
Yes.
So, and then we have the smartphones, right? We basically have computers inside our pockets that are, before something less powerful would take up a whole room. But today, this is something that is in our pocket and is way more powerful than that used to be. And every time there's communications, every time we send a message, every time we connect to a Wi-Fi, every time, we do a bank transaction, everything. And I'm just talking from a, regular person point of view. Now think about, enterprises like, industries that are quite critical, like banking, healthcare, etc. So the diversification of communications is growing, and all of this needs to be protected because a lot of this data is quite crucial, can actually affect, the personal information, can actually affect, something very critical. And we're not even getting to the government components, which, of course need, high level of security, high level grade of encryption, etc. So we can see that all of this is actually expanding quite fast. And, even classical cryptography is, has troubles keeping up to it, because that's why there's so many vulnerabilities out there, because, classically you need to update whenever there's something's broken, etc. You need to really change that as soon as possible. And now when we're saying, okay, you know what, almost all of your cryptography is going to be vulnerable, at some point X, or it's vulnerable today, if we think about, harvest now, decrypt later type of attack, then this is becoming, a very large scale problem. And again, this is just going to keep on, going. And in terms of the number of things that need to be protected, number of applications, number of devices, number of IoT devices, this is just going to be growing, and probably going to be growing exponentially.
Wonderful. Any last thoughts or messages you'd like to share regarding the future of cryptography or cybersecurity?
Well, in terms of, this is quite an interesting field in terms of cryptography. And as we see, it's becoming more and more important. And it's not just, again, 40 years ago, it was probably mostly used by military. Today, it's used everywhere by every, person that we don't even understand that we're using cryptography. That's another thing. So major takeaways is to understand that cryptography is actually used in our lives way more than we can even think about it. So again, if you're sending a WhatsApp message, there is cryptography involved in it. So just keep that in mind. That's one of the key takeaways. And if you're a large enterprise, it's important to understand that you have a very, very complicated infrastructure, and it's not an easy task, if doable at all, by the old methods that we're used to in our cryptographic, let's say, history. That it's actually way more complicated, and it actually needs to, a different angle to the whole crypto management needs to be taken in order to be able to do the migration. And again, we don't know if something beyond quantum computer is going to be built. Maybe 20 years down the road, we'll hear something that is going to be more powerful than quantum computer, and all of the post-quantum algorithms are going to be broken. Who knows? Therefore, we need to re-standardize. So what, I would say that one thing is to tackle it and become more future-proof is to actually have the cryptographic agility involved. Because, if you're switching to post-quantum algorithms, or maybe post-quantum algorithms, or whatever they're going to be called at that time in future, you're going to be able to do this easy and efficiently. So that's my major suggestion. And to understand how important cryptography is today. And sometimes it takes one weakest link, right? You might have a very secure infrastructure, but you miss one point that might become critical, and that would be the point of entry, and you lose everything. So it's like, having awesome walls built all around, but then there's one part you forgot. Maybe it's 1 meter wide, but that's enough for a person to enter.
Right. My goodness. Well, thank you so much, Vladimir, for your time and your experience and your insights. I thought this was a very valuable conversation. I'm sure many will benefit from the intel that you've shared today. I just wanted to thank our audience for joining, and I would encourage you to stay up to date on cybersecurity trends from InfoSec Global and any sort of future content by visiting www.infosecglobal.com. Thank you.
Thank you.